All right, what's up, social media world, Facebook, YouTube? Hope everyone is doing okay. Hopefully that you guys survived all the those that got it, the snow and the bad weather and everything, um, and everybody's doing well. Got through all that polar vortex or whatever they were calling it. Hey, Jen. Um, so yeah, we survived. Our camper froze multiple times, had to get the water back running, and we did everything from insulating and diesel heaters to heat tape and everything we could to keep the camper going. So we went. I think it was over 2 weeks, never seeing above freezing. So it was definitely wild. So, and now we're getting rain. Right now, it's all muddy. Actually, today Sarah and I had to recover a big box truck from some mud in the field here. That was interesting, and Sarah had to pull him out with the ram. But yeah, last weekend. So what have we have been up to? Last weekend we did a level one at Uwharrie, North Carolina, and it was a level one hybrid. So we actually did half day of driving and a half day of recovery. It was cold, even though the temps weren't that low. Most of the day it was above freezing. It definitely, the wind chill factor was through the roof. But we had a great group of students. Had 8 vehicles with. A couple of them had extra drivers, a couple of them had passengers. So that was awesome to get that many people in the class, even in January. And we had a lot of fun doing it. So Sarah's flicking the lights in here at me. so, so we had a lot of fun in that. Students were great. They came ready to learn. Great support from Chris Cagle and the El Dorado Outpost there. And it was kind of cool to be back at Uwharrie doing that. It's been a long time since I've trained there. Back, when I was training with Scott Fields, who was my mentor, we had a great time. So what have we got going on? All right. Well, this next weekend, actually tomorrow, after work, Sarah and I are leaving for Nashville, going to Bells Reserve. We have a weekend of, well, let me back up. For those of you that don't know about Bells Reserve, it is a property right outside of Nashville in Kingston Springs. White Bluff area, where they reached out to us a couple years back to design and build a trail system and obstacle course for them on a portion of that property. So we did that. Great relationship came out of that, and so now we handle all of their off-road stuff. So we're leaving tomorrow. We've got a couple of trainings that we're going to be doing. So super excited about that, as well as they're having an awesome event on Saturday where they're bringing in a group called Rambler, who does over the fire cooking, and it's really very, very wild food. Like the appetizers, like duck pate or something like that. I don't know. I can't even pronounce that stuff. So we're going to be heading there and going to be having a good time doing that and spending some time there this weekend. And hopefully sometime soon we'll get the opportunity to take you guys out there and see the property and kind of experience it. We're going to try to do a class out there. So that's what we're doing this upcoming weekend. And then the weekend after that, we are heading and doing a Commonwealth trail ride at Windrock. So it's about filled up. So if you want to go, make sure you go to our website, morrisonsoutdooradventures.com, or scan the QR code right there. See if I can kind of point to it. There we go. Right up there in the corner. And sign up, right? We are almost full. So we're going to be doing that. That's going to be a lot of fun. It is an intermediate trail ride. Hey, guys. Hey, James. Hey, Shannon. So, all right, what are we going to talk about today? Today we are talking about electronics, right? Vehicles are getting incredibly, incredibly complicated with their electronics. Not only that, but the electronics we are adding to them are getting incredibly complicated. We want to run our lights, we want our fridge, we want, heaters and air conditioning and all this stuff in our camping setups in our vehicles or our off-road vehicles. And with the way new vehicles are, their electrical systems are already taxed, right? And we're doing even wilder things like, running a winch, which draws huge amperage when we're running it. So we're going to kind of touch briefly on this and kind of hit the treetops. Unfortunately, I had someone scheduled to come in and talk about it. but they had an emergency, so they weren't able to do that. So I'm going to do my best, and we're gonna touch on some of those things. But as we're going through this, because there's a lot of opportunities for questions, if you would, and you ask a question in the chat, just preface it with a Q dash and then your question, so I can scroll back and forth and find it pretty quick and easy, and I'll do my best to answer them. But let's jump right into it and kind of talk a little bit about the charging system on our vehicles. Okay, older vehicles, the alternator, well, all vehicles, the alternator charges our battery. Okay, its job is to keep our battery topped up. So as the motor's running, the alternator's turning. It's either run by a V belt for older vehicles or a serpentine belt for a new vehicle. But that alternator turns, it generates 12 volts. Right? Well, actually, it generates more. Can generate upwards of some of them 14.6, but it also, varying on the vehicle, can generate a certain amount of amperage, right? And it's charging that battery. So whatever we're drawing out of that battery, that alternator should be putting it back in until we start adding new things to it, right? Older vehicles that didn't have a lot of computers, we maybe run some lights and stuff off of it, but it didn't have computers and processes going on. They really, really did a good job of keeping that battery topped up. Okay, we didn't have to have all this crazy stuff. And those older alternators actually worked based off the RPM to a certain extent, right? So if our vehicle idled at 800 RPMs or 1,000 RPMs, whatever it may be, 500, but at that lowest idle, they would put out just a minimal amount of voltage and amperage. But as we raise those RPMs to a point, right, we get up around 2,000 RPMs, they would reach, or 1,500 RPMs, they would reach their max output. Okay, so it was based on the RPMs of the engine. Excuse me. But newer alternators, some of us call them smart alternators. I actually call them dumb alternators because to me they're not that smart. Joking, but they're called smart alternators. They actually are constantly sensing the needs of the vehicle and the electrical system, and also sensing the battery, and they are putting out voltage and amperage based on that, right? So if they say, okay, hey, this battery's topped up, they're dropping down their output. Okay, they're dropping it down until they see a need, and they'll crank back up. Doesn't matter if we're at idle or we're redlining that truck. They're choosing how much they're going to put out. It's not changing based on the RPMs. Okay, so that's newer vehicles. Not all, but most newer vehicles are that way. And again, it's because they want to create longevity out of those alternators, so we're not having to change them out very often. They understand that electronics in vehicles is very sophisticated now with CAN bus systems and all that, and different stuff going on. So they are really kind of working to keep that battery topped up. Now, when we start doing things like really heavy winching, right? Some winches can pull upwards of 580 amps when they're at max capacity. So say we have a 10,000 pound capacity winch. When it's pulling 10,000 pounds, it is going to pull that full 580 amps, right? So with that being said, we can easily, with some of those heavier duty things like winching or even jumper cables, or if we put an inverter or something in our vehicle, we can overrun that alternator, okay? Because again, it's sensing what it needs. I remember when the Jeep JK first came out, that if you were winching really hard for any extended period of time, over like a minute or two, that your battery light would come on, because it would sense that battery was dead and that alternator was working. And people's trucks, they'd shut it off and then they wouldn't crank again because the battery was dead, right? So to overcome that, right, and with all these electrical systems, people have started, back in the day, they just put very standard dual battery systems in their vehicles, right? Or you could even put high amp or higher output alternators on your vehicle. Not so much a common thing anymore, putting higher output alternators on there, but most of the dual battery kits now, or some of the dual battery charging systems, right, that are out there now, they actually kind of, some of them trick the alternator, some of them just create draw so that the alternator always stays at its highest output. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about those different kits and what they mean and those charging systems. And then we're going to talk about, the types of batteries like AGM. We're going to talk about standard lead acid, and we'll talk about the lithium or lithium ion type batteries. And we'll talk about other charging sources like solar too. So let me see here. I think I've got some pictures, right? So as we're talking about dual battery setups, throw this one up here. This is a very simple, very simple dual battery setup, right? So we see starting battery there because we always want to protect our electrical system. Okay, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. We add fuses in, right? So that if something happens, it's going to blow that fuse or that breaker or that circuit breaker, and we'll be able to protect the system, right? In the middle there, right, that circular that says true on it, that's what we call a battery isolator. Okay, and there's all different types. There's smart battery isolators, there's dumb battery isolators, there's manual, there's automatic, all types. But what its job or its main function is to always protect the starting battery. Okay, we want it to protect that starting battery. Okay, so if for whatever reason it senses that that starting battery is dropping below a certain voltage, right? Some of them can be 11.9, 12 something or whatever. Some of them we can even set. Then it will basically close, not sending any voltage to our deep cycle or our second battery. Okay, so it protects that starting battery from being drawn down too low. Okay, so yeah, Tony. Yeah, alternators, sometimes they can be too weak to run the fuel pump, or the alternator could be going out. Yeah, 100%. So that's that isolator. Basically, it isolates our starting battery and it protects it. The automatic ones will swap back and forth based on what it needs. The manual ones will normally have a switch or a knob we turn, and it automatically opens and closes, but it's up to us to do that. And then some of the smart ones now, you can actually do both manual or they'll do automatic. And what's really cool is if for whatever reason, say our starting battery died because our winch is running off our starting battery, or anything that has a really intense draw is running off our starter battery, we can actually tie the two batteries together and jump start the starting battery. So some of those smart ones can do that. See, I think I got a picture of one. Yeah, this is the one I currently run. This is a Blue Seas MLACR here. In this particular setup, it's just right there on top of the batteries. In mine, it's actually mounted a little differently, but this is a smart battery isolator. So what it will do is it'll automatically switch back and forth between tying the batteries together, protecting that starting battery. But if I wanted to tie the batteries together for winching, right, to have more reserve capacity, or if I wanted to tie the batteries together for jump starting my starting battery, I can do that through a switch. Okay, or I can even go to that little yellow knob and do it underneath the hood of the vehicle. So okay, we got a question from TNT Overlander of Darren Carden. What are your thoughts regarding removing smaller auto stop batteries and replacing them with a larger secondary battery for a dual battery system? So depending on the vehicle, some vehicles are very touchy with their start-stop batteries, and if you take them out, it will actually cause the vehicle to experience some issues, right? Through check engine lights or have some electrical issues. Personally, like on Jeeps, for instance, I recommend taking the auto start-stop batteries out. Number one, super expensive to replace, super expensive. They are way more expensive than your normal battery on your vehicle. And I've actually seen those when they first started putting them on Jeeps, they created a kind of draw on the system even when the vehicle was shut off. So I recommend taking them out if your vehicle can accommodate that and putting in a dual battery system. Now, this means your auto start stop is not going to work. Okay, it's not going to work if you take that out. I'm sure there are ways to wire it back into your dual battery system, and people have probably done that. I've never really messed with that a whole lot, so I can't speak to that. But I do take them out just because they're going to die. And when they die, they're going to be like a motorcycle battery. They're going to be super expensive to replace. crazy. You know, a smaller battery costs more than a bigger battery. Who'd have thought, right? Hopefully that answers your question. So with the dual battery setups that are out there, I'll see if I got another picture. They can get a little bit more complicated. So like this one right here, we can see coming up. So let me take that ticker off the bottom there. There we go. All right. So this one is actually a dual battery system. So we have our red battery there coming off the alternator. We have our second dual battery system, right? That's over there in the isolator that ties them together with our fuses. Okay. Now we have a third battery, and we're seeing this right on overland vehicles and stuff like that, where we're actually adding in a third battery. Same thing though, it works off an isolator that is protecting our second battery. So our third battery can't draw down our second battery too much, which in turn would cause too much draw on our starting battery. Also here, right, we're starting to see where solar panels are brought in. Now, with solar panels, you know, we can use solar to top up our house battery, keep our starting battery topped up and things like that. Or if we're parked for extended periods of time, that solar can help us have a little bit more time in between having to crank and run the truck. Now, chances are, depending on what you're running off your system, right? If you're running a fridge and you're running inverter and a hair dryer, a coffee maker, you know, all kinds of crazy stuff, charging several laptops, the solar may not be enough, but it will lower the amount that you're going to have to run your vehicle to top up that battery. But again, it's not a complete replacement, okay? And we'll get into that a little bit, but more about solar. But solar also requires a lot of extra components, right? You have to run an MPPT, solar charge controller that charges appropriately, or it won't charge your battery, right? It could overcharge it, it could do all kinds of things. So there's a lot of extra components. In a kit like this, okay, this would probably be, you know, I'd say it'd probably be 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even a little older than that. A kit like this right here, you have a lot of different components, okay, that are talking to themselves, not talking to each other, right? They're just basically working their own little portion of the job. So if you're, for instance, in this one, if you're driving down the road, your alternator's charging your starting battery, but your solar may be charging too, but they're not talking to each other, okay? So they don't know, hey, I don't need anything out of the alternator, so the isolator staying open, adding more draw to the alternator, but the solar is keeping the house battery topped up. So they're not talking to each other. They're not working together, right? It's like, you know, playing tug of war and nobody on your team's working together, okay? So we're all kind of drawing against each other. So when we're looking at dual battery setups like that, they started to come out with other options, right? Okay, I'm going to hide this. And I'm going to hold this up. So one of the newer things on the market, not newer, technology's been around for a little while, but RedArc is a big name in the game, right? We're getting what they call DC to DC chargers, right? In-vehicle battery chargers. So what this RedArc one does in particular is it manages all of that different stuff. So not only is it charging our second battery and protecting our first battery, but it's also managing the solar input as well. And it's very, very smart, okay? So it's actually choosing between solar and alternator. Whichever one's giving the most output or input rather, it's going to pull from that one and charge those batteries. It also understands the different types of batteries out there. So lead acid, AGM, or gel, and lithium ion or lithium batteries, right? And it's charging those batteries appropriately for their type, because different batteries require different types of charging, okay? And we'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. And of course, again, like I said, it's talking, right? And this is a BC to DC charger from RedArc, and it actually, this is a 25 amp one. They have a 45 amp one and a 50 amp one. So depending on your needs and your output, right, and the size of your second battery or third battery or fourth battery, this right here, you may need to upscale it, right? A 25 amp would be like for a standard kind of dual battery setup. Now, one thing that this one does not do by itself, it will not allow you to jump start your second battery or your starting battery, right? So you can't jump start it, but they do have features that you can put in there that will allow you to jump start those batteries. But again, it will protect that starting battery. These start to get a little bit more complicated, sort of, to wire up, but nowhere near as complicated as those dual battery setups like this guy right here, right? Somebody was definitely an electrical engineer when they started putting all this together. So these DC to DC chargers are incredibly good. Some of them do solar, some of them don't, right? Some of them do solar, some of them don't. But they really do a good job of making sure to protect your starting battery, but also appropriately charge your second battery. We'll talk more about that in a minute, okay? All right, so now we've kind of talked about some of the isolators and stuff out there, but in those systems, fuses, right? Any part of your electrical system, everything's fused. Your vehicle has fuses that run it under the hood, probably has them under the steering wheel somewhere in the kick panel or something like that as well. And every electrical system is fused. Also, any electrical system you add needs to be fused, okay? And it needs to be fused close to the source, okay? Close to the source. I actually learned this today. So it has to be whatever the source is, right? So for your starting battery coming into this, you would fuse as close to your starting battery as you can with the appropriate size fuse. But for your second battery, right, maybe this is under the hood and your second battery is, let's say it's in the back of your truck, you actually want to fuse as close to this as possible, leading to your second battery, because this is the source at that point in time, right? So those fuses. Now, fuses or circuit breakers, right, come in all different various forms. I'm not going to get too far in depth with that, but show you this, right? This is what we call an inline fuse holder. Okay, black part right there, we can put a bladed fuse in there, which is similar to what comes in your vehicle. So you can have maxi fuses, you can have midi fuses, mini fuses. There's all different types. What I recommend, because you can get these in all different sizes to match the fuses, the appropriate fuse, use the same one that's in your vehicle, right? Use the same one that's in your vehicle. So that way, if you pop an important fuse like your fuel injection, pull it out of here and you can put it right in your fuel injection. That also makes it easy in carrying common fuses, right? Easy to carry common fuses. But this would be something that you would wire in, say you put in a set of lights, okay? Or you put in a fridge, or you put in an extra plug because you drive a Toyota and all your 12-volt stuff shuts off. You're charging, it won't charge your phone when you turn your truck off, right? So you would put this in line close to the source and you can put your fuse in. Now, if you blow a fuse, right? If you blow a fuse, then you have to replace it. There's no way about it, and you have to put a new one in. So if you don't have a new one, well, you're not going to be using whatever system that fuse is tied to. But the other option is, and these are becoming a lot more prominent, right? They don't work in every scenario, but they are becoming more prominent, is what we're calling thermal circuit breakers, right? Basically, just like a breaker in your house, this is designed, if for some reason there is a peak of amperage that comes through there, it'll pop open and protect your electrical system. So you don't burn up wires and you don't start frying your electrical system in your vehicle, okay? So these are great because they are resettable. Again, though, they don't work in all situations. Now, just because it's resettable, if we reset it and it pops again, then we reset it and it pops again, doesn't mean we want to keep resetting it, okay? It means there is a problem in the electrical system and we need to address that problem, okay? But these are becoming good. I kind of talk about these a little bit in kind of certain scenarios. So my ARB compressor has started blowing its 40 amp fuses, right? And they're 40 amp maxi fuses, really hard to find. You basically have to go to an auto parts store and chances are they only have one, okay? And you need two for a twin compressor. I'm actually swapping mine out for 40 amps, same size as the fuse for these, so they are resettable, right? And that's because my compressor runs so long, airing up multiple vehicles, that it just overheats. So that's a situation where I would put a circuit breaker in, okay? Now, they do have automatic resetting circuit breakers that'll automatically reset, but for me, I like kind of that tactile feel. I don't want it to keep resetting and then popping on its own, and then I have to take it out, okay? And they have all different sizes. pretty much anything from 25 amps all the way up to, I've seen them with 200 amps, right? But if you're running something that's 200 amps with a circuit breaker, we may have some other things to kind of look at on your vehicle. So we always put those protections in our electrical systems, those fuses or circuit breakers that are going to protect them. You can even get what they call MIDI fuses, which is a much larger fuse. But again, some of these fuses can be hard to source, right? And when we're in the backcountry, we can't just run to Advance to get another fuse, okay? And we can't get it off of Amazon. So we want to make sure that it's something that's easy to carry, and we're carrying replacements of those. Now, let's talk a little bit about wires, okay? And don't go too cross-eyed at this, but if you are wiring or someone is doing wiring in your vehicle, okay, again, based on that amperage that we were talking about for the fuse, certain size wires can only carry a certain amount of amperage as it moves it from the source to its destination, okay, over distance, right? And this is important because if I try to run a wire from the very front of my vehicle to the back, there's going to be a certain amount of voltage drop and amperage loss, and this causes heat buildup, and that's what causes a lot of times for our fuses to blow, okay? Or if it's too undersized, the wire can burn up if it's not fused and cause a very, very bad electrical fire on our vehicle or something like that. So I just pulled this one off the internet, but we can see here, right? Let's take something small, right? Like say some of our fridges, some of the smaller fridges out there will pull, say 20 amps, right? So 3 bars down the left-hand side right there tells us 20 amps. If we are running somewhere between 2 to 4 feet, we can get away with 14 gauge wire, very, very small wire, okay? And it will run that. But if we get over that, let's say we go on up and we have to run 10 feet. Well, now we need to go up in our wire size. So there's less resistance in the wire, less heat buildup, and it'll work appropriately, okay? And we don't cause an issue in our electrical system. So we'd have to go up to 10 gauge. Now for things like your winches, right? This one doesn't even go up to the amperage, but if you look at the cables on your winches, they're going to be like double-aught wire, super thick. Like some of them are even as big around as your thumb or as your pointer finger, okay? So understanding, but now that's typically a short distance unless you're running a winch at the rear of your vehicle. Then it could be a long distance, right? So in understanding that, we want to understand that we have to size our wire appropriately, or double check behind the shop that installed your stuff that they size that wire appropriately. And you can kind of see this one's color coded. I actually keep one of these taped and hanging on the inside of my toolbox so that I can refer to this anytime I need it. That way I can tell. Now, it's not a bad thing to oversize your wire, but be realistic. Wire is expensive, okay? So we try to get pretty close to the correct gauge of wire. Sometimes we may oversize it a little bit, but you don't want to oversize your fuse. Make sure your fuse is appropriate, okay? All right, pull that down. Now, let's talk a little bit about solar panels, okay? I want to talk about solar panels a little bit. There are, for the most part, 3 styles of solar panels out there. Show this first one here, kind of old school. This is what we call a rigid panel, okay? Basically, this rigid panel has it's hard, doesn't flex. It's got actually a frame around it and sometimes underneath of it there. And that panel normally is going to be mounted so that a little airflow can go underneath, okay, to help dissipate that heat, okay? So the other type that's pretty common nowadays is what we call a flexible panel. These, they're not new, but they're newish, okay? Flexible panels typically are glued down, right? And they can flex around curved surfaces and stuff like that. They are great for putting them on odd things, like, if you're gluing it down on the roof of your vehicle. There's even a company that makes them that glues down on the hood of your vehicle, or if you're gluing them down on the top of your rooftop tent, which is really popular now. And if you are constrained by space, you can get them in all different shapes and sizes. Downside to these, major downside, right? They cannot dissipate heat like the rigid panels can because there's no airflow underneath, okay? I have seen these burn up the panels that are in there and basically become inoperable. Okay. And at that point in time, now you got a panel glued and you're going to have to take it off. The companies that do the on the hood ones, great idea, but because number one, they don't get any airflow underneath of them, so they're getting hot, they are burning up. But number two, because you're getting all that heat from the motor coming up underneath, it's burning up because they do have capacitors and stuff in them, right? So we kind of have to understand that may not be a good option, right? Make sure you're buying kind of from a reputable manufacturer. The other option with solar panels is what we call a portable solar panel like this. Sometimes they can be very small. Sometimes they can be huge like this, where we actually pull them out, plug them in typically to a plug that's set in our vehicle, or if you run something like the electronic jackery boxes and EcoFlows and Gold Zeros, they'll have a plug that plugs right in. Some of these will have built-in MPPT chargers. Some of them, whatever you're plugging it into, has to have the MPPT charger. So make sure you have that, because you can't just tie solar panels into your battery and hope it charges it. But with the portable ones, the great thing is we can pull them out of the vehicle, set them up out at our camp, and move them as the sun moves to make sure they're getting the optimal amount of sun, right? Because again, they work off the sun, and right. So if they're flat on your roof, but your sun's starting to set, or you're kind of faced at an odd angle, they may not be reaching their peak power. Okay, they may not be reaching that peak power. So here you can actually tilt these towards the sun, and they work extremely well. Downside to them is, they're in the back of your vehicle getting bounced around, things break. Or on the other hand, the other downside to them is they do take up space in your vehicle, right? And you have to unfold them. And there's even like solar blankets and all kinds of stuff now, but it's an option, right? But make sure that you have a way for that solar charging to come in. Okay, Victron makes a separate MPPT, Renogy. There's tons of them out there. Or you have something like this, right? That's going to handle that for you. Okay, and take that and charge your vehicle appropriately. Because if not, that could just overcharge your battery, right? You've got to have some way to manage that power coming in and how it's being put into that battery. So solar, again, it's a great alternative. We are limited to a certain extent how much solar we can come in. Number one, based on the charger, right? How much that charger is willing to accept. And they make huge chargers, but we're not going to mount a big 2 foot by 2 foot charger like for a house inside our vehicle. But also by roof space, right? We're also limited by roof space as far as that's concerned. All right, so that's solar. Let's talk a little bit about batteries. Okay, old school style batteries like the lead acid batteries, or just that they're still out there. A lot of vehicles come with lead acid style batteries, but basically you've got a battery that's filled with acid, right? And they have lead cells in there, and it accepts charge and it discharges. Okay. Also, you have AGM batteries, which is I believe it's active glass mat, but basically kind of the same thing, but typically they're sealed, right? They're completely sealed, so you don't have to worry. They're a service-free battery. You don't have to try to add acid back into them or anything like that. They store and they discharge, right? Sort of store. Then you have gel batteries, right? That typically are going to be, they're going to be sealed, but they're also going to kind of take in power and kind of discharge it appropriately. So what battery do you want to run in your vehicle? That's kind of depends on your use, right? Your budget, number one, right? How much money do you have to spend? A lead acid battery is going to be cheaper than an AGM or a gel battery. Also your space, right? Sometimes the AGMs or the gel batteries can take up a little bit more area, so it's hard to make a direct switch over. And also what your needs are, right? If you're just running your vehicle up and down the road, you may not need an expensive battery if it doesn't have a lot of extra stuff running off of it. So just kind of in understanding that, we can make a good selection for our battery. Now, the newer ones, lithium ion batteries or lithium iron batteries, they're a little bit different, right? So I wasn't incredibly up to date on this, so I actually talked with Clayton at Commonwealth 4x4 a little bit and told him to give me a brief rundown about batteries. So you take your lithium, or sorry, let me back up. You take your lead acid battery, your AGM battery, and your gel battery, okay? And they are a certain capacity, right? Even a deep cycle or a marine battery or something like that, they're a certain capacity. But realistically, as we discharge that battery, we are losing voltage. Okay, so as that battery's capacity is getting down, let's say it gets down around 50%, it's no longer going to be in that 12 to 13 volt range, right? So if we're discharging it faster than we're putting into it, now we're going to have stuff that really requires 12 volts is going to struggle. It's going to start to not work efficiently. We could even burn it up or anything like that. So with those systems, we typically only get about 75% of the capacity out of that battery, because as it drops down, again, it's not pushing out the full 12 whatever volts, right, or 12 to 13 volts. So we have to really kind of understand, that you kind of got to oversize those batteries a little bit in order to get what you need out of them. Okay. Now, for instance, your battery in your vehicle that it comes with on a cold day, right? You go to crank it and it turns over, rah, 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 but it's slow starting. That cold's affected that battery. It's not pushing enough voltage to start that vehicle. Okay. Doesn't mean the battery's dead. It's just not pushing enough voltage to start that vehicle. Okay. And there's all kinds of other things that play in that, like cold cranking amps and all that stuff. But I'm not going to get too far in depth with that. Okay. But what I will say about the lithium battery series that we have now, yes, they are very much more expensive. Okay. A whole lot more expensive. We'll talk about prices in a second. But they also require special charging, right? You can't just drop it in your vehicle and expect your alternator to charge it appropriately. You have to have special charging for lithium batteries. But what they do is we can use 100% of that battery, okay? Because it stores that power and discharges it evenly no matter what. We can take that battery all the way down, okay? So if we're at 50%, that battery's still going to put out, 13 volts or 12.5 volts or whatever is in it. Okay. So it's always going to have the appropriate amount of voltage until it's dead. Okay. Now, the problem, if we kill it all the way and we're not trying to charge it, then you can kind of ruin a lithium battery, or you have to jump start it back up again and get it to take a charge again. So, and they are super expensive, right? So there's one from a company and it's like 300 and some odd or 280 or whatever amp hours, right? It's a big one, but it's like $2,400, right? So that's an expensive battery. We can get knockoffs and stuff like that off of Amazon, but be careful, right? These are also a little bit more of a volatile battery. They also do not handle cold at all. Most of them will not accept charge below a certain temp. Okay. And some of them do have built-in battery management systems. You take companies like Battleborn, Dakota, Lion Energy, and so many more. They actually have built-in battery management systems into that battery, right? Some of them even have Bluetooth and little buttons you can push on them that make sure that battery is being charged appropriately. My dad has a lithium ion for all of his running off of the BCDC in his Humvee, and he actually has to have a heat mat underneath of it for when it's cold to make sure, that battery can be charged even when it's cold. So that's some of the downsides to the lithium iron batteries, right? Now, again, you get 100% of that battery, so whatever that capacity is. Now, when we're thinking about capacities of batteries, I was asking Clayton, I was like, well, how do we know how much battery do we need? He said, well, you got to take three things into account. Number one, again, budget, right? For me, I can't afford a $2,200 or $2,400 battery. So I'm not going to put that in my vehicle for a lithium battery, okay? But he said, then you got to identify your needs. And I was like, well, we have problems with our RAM all the time, dying because it's running the fridge, it's charging phones, charging radios, running air compressors, all kinds of stuff. and it sits, right? Because it's not what we're taking out on the trail. Typically, we take our Land Cruiser out, then come back to the Ram. So it's always dying, okay? So what you got to identify what the draw of those components are. So I have to look at my fridge. I have to look at all the chargers for the radios and all that and identify how much capacity I really need. But then also space, right? Because again, going back to any one of these batteries, the more capacity in that battery, the more space we're going to need for that battery. I mean, they make huge lithium ion batteries. You can see that to scale, right? My head, right to this big. So if we take, like, say a 380 amp hour lithium ion battery, I mean, it's going to be big and tall. You got to have a place to put that where it's secure, okay? Or if you have like a big, huge, deep cycle AGM battery or gel battery, same thing. We got to have a place to put that that's secure. Number one, from the elements, but also secure in the event of an accident or something like that. So kind of take those three things into account. You know, I've fortunately working in shops, I've got to do a bunch of wiring, and I've learned a ton, especially from guys like Clayton and Wes, who have really explained it to me. But I mean, we've put, gosh, 600 some odd amp hours in several batteries in a vehicle for somebody that's going to be running a fridge, right? So, you know, they're just adamant on, I need this much power. I want to be able to charge everything, right? I want to charge everything, and I want to be able to do it whenever I want. So just kind of understanding that in making those decisions on those batteries. The one thing I will say, you know, there's something to be said about calling and reaching out to a shop and kind of asking those questions so they can help you out with that, okay? And make those decisions. Again, we're only kind of hitting the treetops right here. And speaking of shops, what I'm going to do right here, okay, I'm going to throw up a QR code, okay? This QR code right here is for a RedArc BC-DC charger, okay? And I think, let me double check here. All right. So I've got a 10% off for you if you decide to order one from Revere Overland. Let me make sure, I got to get the ticker up there real fast. But scanning that QR code will take you to Revere Overland. Then you just surf on over to the electronics section and choose the one you want, because again, they have 25 amp, 45 amp, and 50 amp. Let me save this, make sure I got it. Oop, nope, I didn't spell that right. Bad me, right? All right, let me get that up there, make sure it's showing up. All right, MOA RedArc 10 for 10% off RedArc charger at Revere Overland. Again, our friend Rob at Revere Overland in Commonwealth right here. And the other thing I really like about these, you know, I'm gonna break the rules a little bit and open this. Clayton, don't be mad at me. But the great thing about this is they are easy to wire up. If I can do it, anybody can do it, right? Because they take a little bit, but they are all color coded and fancy, and they have great directions. But all these awesome wires coming out right here, but they're all color coded, right? Brown goes to your second battery, red comes from your main battery, ground. Then they have a orange and green wire based on the type of battery it is, AGM, gel, lithium ion. You have to do something with these. Yellow for solar input, and then they have a trigger one that measures whether the vehicle is stopped or started. So these are great, and again, very easy for you to wire up. Got a question here. Is it worth purchasing the batteries such as Battleborn with the heated feature and extra price to go with it? Again, I would go back to budget, right? If you want peace of mind with some of those batteries, I would probably say, yeah, the heated feature is nice because it will allow you to charge that at any point in time. If budget does not allow it, because like Battleborn, man, they're expensive. That's probably one of the more expensive ones out there. But you know, if it's not in your budget, then I certainly wouldn't do that. You can get heat mats from Amazon that work extremely well as far as keeping them warm. You can also get insulation and stuff for them to help keep them warm. But you know, I don't know what the price difference is on the heated ones versus the non-heated ones. But if you're going with lithium, heated is a nice feature, right? Yeah, Tony, blame it on Adam. Yeah, Adam can get away with anything. I can't, right? Adam gets away with everything in the shop. Adam's the other guy that works with me in the shop at Commonwealth when I'm working there, not training. Dude is super smart with vehicles. I mean, yeah, and he can get away with anything, right? So anyway, this is you could, if you have some electrical experience, wire this up yourself. And actually, the directions that come with it are great. Okay, it does a really good job of kind of laying it out and making it easy for us to do what we got to do. The other cool thing is this kind of lets us know. So I show it up there at the screen, but it does have LEDs to kind of let us know what it's doing. Okay, and how it's kind of setting the battery up. Okay, because I said different types of batteries kind of need different types of charging cycles, right? So like a lithium battery has to go through a boost charging mode, but it can only charge for so long, so it doesn't get so too hot. Then it goes into what they call an absorption mode, letting that charge really settle in, and then it goes through a float mode, keeping it at a certain charge for a while before it boosts and takes it back up again. So this does that all that you need to do. And it can also do appropriately for deep cycle batteries and stuff like that. Okay, this is actually kind of like a booster. Let's say your alternator, you know, it puts out a certain amount of voltage, right? But this will boost that voltage, not boost it, but this will take that voltage and take it and kind of amp it up a little bit, or the amperage into your other battery. So it doesn't necessarily trick your alternator into charging more, right? But it does draw from your starting battery to put into your second battery appropriately and do it correctly for the type of battery it is. So you can have two different types of batteries with smart chargers like this. You can have a lead acid or a gel battery or AGM battery and a lithium battery. Okay, so with smart chargers you can do that. Some other ones like that Blue Seas one I showed you earlier, you can't. Okay, because it's going to charge and you could kill a battery. Okay, because it's not getting the appropriate amount of voltage and not being charged appropriately. Another question, any thoughts on setting up onboard welders? Yes, and actually this is becoming a really hot topic. So back in the day, we used to be able to get things like, they called them ready welders or premier power welders. Actually, they still exist, and the people who make the pull pal for recovery, amazing family, Gramillion family, Max Gramillion and all those people, they make some really cool stuff and very, very smart, and actually some of the nicest people I ever met. But they own those welders now. And basically those welders, they are a more complicated install. They run off of upsized alternator, but you can do welding with them, right? Vehicle running and it's welding and it's doing its thing. They were really popular in the kind of rock crawler buggy world for repairs and stuff on the trail. We don't see them as much anymore, which is kind of a shame. Again, they were phenomenal welders. They were that you could use, MIG welders, stick welders, that you could use on the trail, and as long as your vehicle is running and putting out the correct amperage, you could weld as long as you wanted to. And they were super cool. I've gotten to play with some of them before on the military training side, and they were great. They don't work so well on newer vehicles because of kind of the smart alternators and stuff that are out there. But there are newer ones that are starting to hit the market that are rechargeable welders. So basically they come with a battery pack. Big one right now is Carnage welder. Basically you charge it just like you would charge a phone or a laptop or anything with a battery, and then you pull it out of the vehicle and you start welding with it. Not, if I remember right, I can't remember the specs, but you actually get like 30 to 45 minutes of welding, something like that, maybe less, maybe it was 20 to 30 minutes of welding out of it. But they are a great tool on the trail. We used to teach on military training, actually welding with batteries. So we'd take batteries out of the vehicle and wire them up correctly, and we'd weld with either a stick or we even with coat hangers, right? But there was no control in it, and you can burn a battery up and kill a battery. Now you don't have it for your vehicle. But like those, like the Carnage welder and stuff like that, they're pretty cool. There's even some now that are all contained like in a Pelican case, and you actually plug them in with jumper cables and you can run. I like the Carnage one for kind of the newer ones because it's not actually drawing off your alternator and battery, so you're not wearing out your battery and your charging system in your vehicle, right? So you use it and then you just charge it, and it's a pretty neat tool. I haven't got my hands on one, but I've really been watching them hard, and maybe I can get them to jump on one of these streams and kind of talk to us a little bit. So great question. All right, let me go back here. So yeah, so with all that being said, we're kind of coming to an end here, and I don't want to go over our hour time limit, right? And then Sarah starts looking grumpy at me. But in understanding, with all these electrical systems, right? It's very important that everything's kind of well thought out. Okay. Again, I go back to this picture, that I'm going to throw up right here. An electrical engineer definitely thought this out. Okay, and put this all together, and it probably worked very well for him because he understood it. Okay, but it's not necessarily right a one size fits all. So you need to think about what your use is going to be. If you're just looking to run a fridge in your vehicle, you may not even need a dual battery setup, or you need just a standard dual battery setup. Okay, something very cheap and inexpensive. But if you're going to be doing a lot of winching, a lot of staying off grid for multiple days, and lights and charging stuff like we do, charging radios and things like that, we may need to get a little bit more complicated with it. Okay, maybe a lithium battery is a little bit out, a lithium iron battery is a little bit outside of what we need, but it's not necessarily a good option for me because of the budget, right? I can't use the lithium battery because it's not a good option with budget wise. But a standard dual battery setup probably wouldn't be a bad idea, and I could probably do it relatively easily and quickly. Got another question here. A Jeep question for a Toyota guy. Thoughts on using the Taser Mini to boost your RPMs in winch mode when you know you're pulling a lot of power, winching and airing up for longer times? Yeah, so newer alternators, right? Newer alternators don't put out voltage, or their output isn't necessarily tied to RPMs anymore. That's an older thing. Now, it probably helps a little bit. I don't know to what extent, but it's not necessarily tied to the output. What it's actually tied to is what that smart alternator is sensing the need of the vehicle is needing, right? So it even like the tasers and stuff like that, it's not going to help a whole lot. Now, there's other benefits to keeping your RPMs up a little bit in certain situations, but as far as like winching and stuff like that, it's not going to be a huge help, right? But where kind of keeping your RPMs up in winch mode and stuff like that is when you're in gear with those higher RPMs, it's turning those tires a little bit for you and helping you out. Now, older vehicles, we didn't have tasers and stuff, but we actually would take gear selectors off of bikes with the cables, and we would tie them to our throttle body or the throttle, and we could click them into place to get those higher RPMs. So in that situation, it does help. There are some black magic trickery out there with little circuit diode things that people are making that go in certain fuses that tricks the alternator to always putting out max amperage of 14 point whatever volts. But to me, that's kind of like that's not necessarily a good option because it's a workaround, and we could burn that alternator up, causing it to always work. So hopefully that answers your question. Typically for standard winching and stuff like that, and airing up, your alternator should be putting enough in there unless, you're really, really stuck. Then we need to be driving a little bit anyway. Yep, old chokes. Yeah, exactly, Tony. So great questions. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So you got the product of the week, the Red Arc BC-DC MOA Red Arc 10 for 10% off Red Arc Charger at Revere Overland. Make sure you support those guys because they're the ones kind of helping me put these together in the background. But outside of that, I'm going to throw up another one here. So here's another QR code, right? So this QR code is for Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association, sfwda.org, Trailfest, April 11th to 14th. Again, phenomenal event. All the funds go back to their grant programs, their conservation efforts, and their educational programs. Nobody that sits on the board is paid. It is a nonprofit, so it's a great opportunity to support that organization. And if you are looking to win some cool stuff at a raffle, gosh, Sarah, my wife, is the one getting the stuff in for the raffle. She has got some cool stuff coming in. So really cool, and it's a huge raffle. So make sure you go to their website, scan that QR code, whatever you got to do. But see us there. We'll be putting on classes and all kinds of stuff. And then shameless plug there, right? Shameless plug. So if you're interested in one of our classes and stuff like that, make sure you go over to scan the QR code or morrisonsoutdooradventures.com and check out one of our classes or trips or something coming up in the future. Outside of that, ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you for sharing these and doing everything you can to help us out. Every like, share, and comment and everything really helps us continue to put these out. It helps us kind of build our brand and all that kind of cool stuff. And if you have missed any of our previous live streams, you can go over to our YouTube channel, Morrison's Outdoor Adventures, subscribe, and you can see all the past ones that we've done on there. Try to keep them all in the live stream playlist there. But you can watch them kind of at your leisure, and check that out. But again, guys, tell your mom, your dad, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, cousins, dogs, hairdresser. Tell your dentist, right? When they're feeling that cavity, be like, oh, watch the live stream. Tell them, right? So that we can continue to kind of get this out and spread the word about what we do and who we are, and continue to educate, right? That's what makes us the most excited. But outside of that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for joining me and hanging out tonight. And we will see you guys next time. Bye.